So we are talking today about retention under pressure. So designing and L&D programs that engage and retain talent. Before we get going, just want to introduce myself. I am Becky. I'm the head of people at LearnUpon. Joining me today is Aisling, who everyone will know at this point. She's down the back there. And together we're going to take you through the next kind of 45 minutes. So today what we're going to cover is designing programs that engage and retain your employees. So this is it's really a HR challenge to solve rather than a learning and development challenge specifically. But we're going to talk today and explore how well-designed L&D programs can be a driver for engagement and retention of talent. So we'll talk about connecting the dots. We'll talk about how to personalise your learning and make it practical. And we'll also talk about working smarter, not harder. So Aisling and I are going to be sharing our insights on designing programs that engage and retain. But as you're all experts in your business, we'll be using the knowledge and the expertise in the room. So for the second half, we're going to be doing a brainstorming session, so getting you into smaller groups. And then we'll bring everybody back at the end to share some insights. Okay, so the retention challenge, what is it? According to LinkedIn Learning, 90% of organisations are concerned about employee retention, and providing learning is the number one retention strategy. What do we mean when we talk about the retention challenge? Really, we're talking about the difficulties that companies face in holding on to talented employees over time. And what does that mean for your business? So it can mean higher turnover rates, so employees leaving faster than expected. That costs the business time, money, but most importantly, continuity. Onboarding and hiring, retaining or onboarding new employees is expensive. Estimates put it at anywhere up to 2 times somebody's annual salary in order to replace them. So it's really costly, especially if you're a smaller business. Losing high performers or high potential employees, it's often the most skilled, the high potential, the skills shortage employees who leave first because their skills are in demand. So that can be a real problem for people as well. Difficulty maintaining culture momentum. So frequent departures will disrupt your team dynamics. They'll weaken the company culture, but they'll also slow down progress on your strategic goals and objectives as well. And then finally, talent shortages. So in industries or roles where skills are particularly niche or scarce, retaining your employees is critical to maintaining your competitive advantage. Can't just easily backfill those roles, so it is a real problem if those people leave. So it's a little quiet in here. It's afternoon, so I'm going to get you all talking for a second. And throw out a question to the group. I'm going to maybe, if you have a response to this, put up your hand. Michelle's going to be running around with the microphone. But what changing dynamics are impacting workplace learning for you today and why?
We're 100% virtual. So all of our training is done virtually now. We do very little, if any, in-house training where somebody comes into a training room and I get to talk with people. So just that's very impactful.
For my company, we have a lot of, we're kind of had some layoffs, we've had some cuts, and we're not really hiring. And so we're having the weird phenomenon of the people who are there clinging to their positions and being really reluctant to learn other things and other jobs. They'd either just kind of, hunker down and hope it all passes over or whatever. So it's kind of that's a strange thing that we're dealing with. I don't know if it's just the US or what.
Hey, yeah, that is tough. Yeah. Oh, great.
I think kind of going hand in hand with what he's saying is just more people are so committed to their job because of the landscape that they don't want to find the time to learn anything. It's more like, I know I'm good at this and I know this will retain my job. So why would I spend any time trying to learn what you're trying to teach me? What is it going to do or how is it going to affect my position when that comes into play?
Okay, yeah, that is a real challenge. Is anyone else having that problem? See some nodding heads.
Our company over the last year and a half has replaced all of their executives. And it's made the company very uneasy and the culture has just gone downhill, like terrified. And so that's what we're facing right now.
Okay, why is that?
All the new executives, if they're going to do a good job.
Okay. So we know that learning is a key driver of engagement and retention. So 94% of employees say they would stay longer at a company that invests in their learning and development. This is according to a recent LinkedIn Learning report. But only 31% of US employees said that they had the opportunities to learn and grow at work. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. So employees today, as you would have heard from Des and Brendan's session this morning, they're looking for something more than just training. They're looking for clear and visible development pathways. Gen Z in particular, like they're coming into the workforce and they're kind of changing the dynamics as well. And if these things don't exist, then they'll start looking for them elsewhere. So what do we do? How do we tackle it? One of the first things that we do is connect the dots. So Aisling and I we work together very closely. We spend a lot of time talking to each other about this stuff. And it's one of our favourite phrases, ABCD, always be connecting dots. So much of what we do in L&D and HR is connecting the dots for people, and it's even more important when you're talking about learning programs. We want to make sure that we're connecting the dots on our programs so that the right skills development is happening for people, for the business, but also for giving those people the meaningful career development and progression that they're looking for. So Brendan said earlier that 55% of learning pros say that L&D has a seat at the table, which is up 5 points from a couple of years ago. That's really good progress, but I think there's a long way to go. And I know from talking to a few of you over the last couple of days, it's still a big barrier in having that seat at the table. So we're very lucky in that as an LMS company, we do. But I understand it's not easy. And so one of the things that we make sure that we do for effective talent retention is connecting all of these dots here. So business goals, HR strategy, talent retention strategy, and our L&D strategy as well. That ensures that our learning initiatives are not only relevant, but they're also really impactful as well. It guides our work. It provides a clear path for execution. And so that's how we kind of try and structure what we do when we're trying to roll out new programs and things like that. It can't be done through learning alone, though. I think there's so many other dots and pieces of pie that come into play. So competency framework, and again, Nate, where's Nate? I was talking to Nate about competency frameworks and stuff like that. There's lots of other things as well. Performance reviews, succession planning, reward and recognition. We need to really understand all of the moving parts in order to help engage and retain people. So for the next part of this session, I'm going to hand over to Aisling, and she's going to take you through the next few slides.
Thank you so much. So for the rest of the session, we wanted to make it as practical as possible. I love when I go to conferences and people show me what they're actually doing, just so I can copy it or plagiarize it a little bit. So I wanted to share as much of what we're doing at Learn Upon to try and actually drive engagement through learning. And Becky's teed it up really well on how we work together as an L&D and HR team. And we do a lot of strategic thinking, big picture planning of what skills do we need? But then we actually need to build a program. So that's essentially what I'm going to share. And then we can hand over to everyone for some brainstorming. So in terms of building programs, I was trying to think of a compressed framework that we use and make it as simple as possible in terms of driving engagement. So we've already mentioned aligning your L&D and HR goals. The next part for us is really figuring out, no matter what learning program we're doing, what skills and competencies need to be developed during this program. And then how can we create a personalized learning journey to help deliver that? So one example that I did want to share today is our Managing at Learn Upon program. So Aidan, I hope you won't mind me calling you out now. Aidan is our new VP of Engineering. So he's the real life learner that is going to go through this path, which is very exciting. So this is a program we have developed for our managers that are either newly promoted within the business. So maybe someone who's been a really strong individual contributor that gets promoted, or a really experienced hire like Aidan who's coming in to take over a whole function. So as you can imagine, there is some value in having the groups together of mixed level managers, and there's lots of great peer insights that can be shared. But obviously the experience levels are really different. So we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we make something that is really engaging for managers and is going to create a great experience and hopefully ultimately retain them in that manager position. It's expensive to replace them. So what we've done is start off with our manager competencies. So we've 3 key manager competencies, trying to keep it as simple as possible. When you're doing competencies, it's always a desire to maybe try and make it more complicated and longer, but the simpler, the better for your learners. So taking those key competencies and then building some dynamic learning journeys for our learners. So most people will go through the initial courses together, things around our culture code, anything that's maybe context specific to the company. And then we start to break them out by their experience level. So I'll just show you kind of a more detailed example. of what this would look like in practice. So if we have Aidan as our learner in this example, he's going to go through that course that everyone goes through in terms of setting up their learning, their goals, just kind of giving them the expectations of what they'll get out of it. And as you can see then, it just starts to go into the head of an exec route that you can see up top and bring him through a couple of courses and assignments. And just in that last kind of column there, I just popped in how we blend our learning. So we do our live sessions together, as I mentioned. And then when it comes to doing the assignment piece or the follow-up piece on our LMS, we usually kind of take a snippet of the live training as the micro learning. Then we put in an assignment, and the assignment is based on your seniority level. So that's what the difference is between the learning journeys. So a conversation, Aidan is managing managers. So the conversation that he has with his people is going to be different to a manager who's coaching an individual contributor. So we've essentially tailored the assignments to account for that and make sure that it doesn't feel really generic, because I think that's just a way that you would disengage a really senior manager pretty straight away. So that's just an example of what we do. Obviously, we finish off with a nice certificate at the end so everyone can feel good about their training. But just to give you guys an example of what we're doing around that piece. So in terms of the next strategy that we use to drive engagement and hopefully ultimately retention with our learning programs is to make it personalised and practical. Everyone here is probably pretty familiar with the idea of personalising learning, but one thing that we've learned over the last couple of months in particular is just how practical everything needs to be for your learner. So most of us will probably be familiar with the idea that you learn most on your job and just trying to make it as experiential as possible. So we've tried to kind of bring that into this. So first up, the way that we try to personalise things around maybe skills development programs or any kind of training programs is to connect the dots between the skills I want to develop, the skills I need to develop, and the skills that the business needs. Unfortunately, they're never all the same thing with our learners, and I don't know if this will resonate with anyone, but a lot of the time our learners are really passionate to learn a new skill that seems like a good idea, like AI. Even if it has nothing directly relevant to their role, they may have a very obvious skills gap in another area if they were to review their competencies, and then actually their role is evolving and they need to be more strategic. So trying to connect the dots between those skills to make it more engaging for them is really important. And one of the key things that we've done is empower our managers to have these conversations. So I think when it comes to designing kind of skills development or training, you can obviously use AI and systems, but there is a people element as well that you need to have just to create the engagement and feel like my manager cares about this, my company cares about this, and just having that. So this has been a really helpful model for us to train our managers on. And then the second thing that we use, which probably everyone is familiar with, 70-20-10, being learning people. And like I knew this before, but when it came to designing our skills development plans, which is how we're kind of tackling our skills strategy at the moment, and I'll share an example in a second, this has become really important for us. So there's a tendency if someone says, hey, I need to develop a new skill, you're like, okay, here's a LinkedIn Learning course or a LinkedIn Learning journey. That's our content partner, whatever your content partner might be. And hey, do 7 hours of learning. Obviously, that's not that engaging, and it's also just not that practical. A lot of the stuff in courses is not directly applicable to someone's job. And one thing I've noticed from our learners is when it's not directly applicable, they tend to give feedback straight away of like, oh, it wasn't that helpful. And they're not necessarily in the learning mind. You know, learning people, I'm like, oh, surely you got something out of it. But so I know. It's just been really important to kind of restructure how we think about this. So we tend to build our plans now using this model, which I'll just share a real example that we use. So we do use AI to generate this bit, which I'll chat about in a minute. But essentially this is a real life example as well. We had a manager go through manager coaching with cohort. It was maybe 3 or 4 weeks of live sessions, and then they wanted to continue their learning on this particular topic. So we just helped them to generate a plan, which would mostly focus on using their coaching skills. So giving them some really concrete ways that they can get feedback, use generative listening, use questions and lots of stuff like that. We also gave them then suggestions for their social learning. So how can they work with their team? How can they put the coaching questions in the performance management system, and just some helpful tips there. And then rounding it out with a bit of formal learning. So what we did is we just took really short videos from LinkedIn Learning and microed it out to the coaching skills. So already this is much more directly applicable to that person's role, and it's a bit more engaging than just saying, okay, here's a follow-up coaching course on LinkedIn. So that's just how we're kind of doing the practical and personalized piece. And then the last bit that we are doing is work smarter, not harder. So the last two pieces that we've been using to help create engagement with our learning programs is empowering the managers to actually use that AI prompt that we talked about there. So we have the prompt ready. It generates that 70-20-10 plan pretty easily. And what we found is by having the manager do this with a team member, it just creates automatic buy-in. So if it's something that L&D creates, or even if you have created it for yourself, it's just not that engaging. If my manager is co-creating this with me, we can then build it into my workflow. We can bring it up in my one-to-ones. It can become just part of our daily rhythm. So just even giving managers this as a tool has been really, really powerful for us at Learn Upon. It's just been really cool as well to kind of enable people around using AI for learning and get that kind of started. And then the last thing that we are using to work smart, not hard, is learning journeys, which some people may be familiar with, and I kind of showed in that manager program. But I suppose if you have a lot of skills and competencies that you need to train your people on, if you have a lot of levels within your orgs, if you have manager levels, that can become obviously super complicated to try and start training people in an engaging way. So one thing that we are working on at the moment is enabling around our competency framework and trying to figure out, like, I don't think it's just engaging to like enroll you in a learning path for your level and leave it at that. So we're trying to make it a little bit more context specific, where everyone in the company will go through the first course together, which is like, how do we communicate, Learn Upon, what language do we use, all those kind of company specific things. And then you start to break into your individual level and we'll blend it out with assignments and stuff. So just trying to add a little bit more, I guess, to the learning experience for people. So that is everything that we're doing at the moment at Learn Upon. Hopefully that was helpful. And I'll pass it back over to Becky now to tee up our brainstorming.
So we're going to share 3 topics, 5 minutes per topic. You're going to chat amongst yourselves. Ashley and I are going to move around the room as well to join some of the conversations. And then at the end, we'll come back and we'll see how many gripes we can get through to share one key insight from the discussion.
I don't know. I think it was really interesting hearing about our different stories being remote versus in person and the types of employees that we serve, because we all had different modalities of trying to improve our learning culture or measure the learning culture. And I thought that was really interesting to hear, because we just get so, blinded by our current situation being fully remote. And so it's interesting to hear. Sometimes I think, oh man, if you in person, this would be a lot easier. But then hearing struggles that the people that are in person, they're trying to get more on demand, they're online, and we're trying to get off of it. So it was just really
Great. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for allowing you to pick on you. Yep.
Yeah, there was one other thing that connected to something earlier that Bianca had said in her session, was taking advantage of folks' inboxes as well. Like put the content where they are. I think it's kind of a session.
20%. You out the mic here. Oh, great. I think one of the questions that really we talked about a lot was, how do you build the culture around learning? And I think one thing that we always forget is that it is kind of a human first experience. Because I feel like the only way that I was able to step away was for people to trust me enough to know that if I'm putting something out, it's because you didn't need me. You know what I mean? So I think for me, understanding the culture of learning is, we have to put the pieces in place first. I can't just come to you and say, hey, watch this video. It should be enough for you. Sometimes it does have to be like, hey, I made this video. I know what it's touching on. Here's the touch point. But I also think another piece that we were talking about is, how do you get a piece of the ROI pie when in L&D we don't really get any? How do you quantify a click? How do you quantify a view? How do you really know that it's affecting the customer in a way that's actually bringing in a return on investment? And I think that really comes down to figuring out, what are you tracking so that you can quantify it to a number? That could be an agreement with executives in advance saying, hey, every time somebody lands on this page and clicks this, it's $1 for me or a cent. Or it's something as, hey, the support tickets come down this way. It costs this much money per hour for a support rep. I'm taking it down 20%, X, Y dollars. You know what I mean? But I think all of those things really come into play of really understanding what your company landscape looks like, because there's 18 million ways to skin a cat, and we just have to figure out which one is for you.
So now one thing that my company is doing that we talked about a little bit is the use of like deputizing bellwether people to be influencers, right? We have a team of people who are vice presidents, directors, up and comers who've been to our training, who can, we ask them to put videos and things on Viva Engage, just trying desperately to like blaze the trail. We don't have a great learning culture, but these people are the ones who are like, hey, Flipped on Phonics worked for me, that kind of thing, And so, yeah, just having those people do those testimonials have actually kind of slowly been building.
Okay. So kind of to wrap up, I think it's really important to remember that retention and the retention challenge is not just about people exiting your business. It's about protecting the skills and the experience, the knowledge, and also the relationships that have been built and that drive your business forward and ultimately help you win. So the takeaway from today, I'd love everyone to think about one little improvement that they could make to their L&D offering based on the discussions today.